guys, welcome back to another episode here at Yashavi Ministries with Casa de Israel Yarah. Thank you again for being here. This week's Torah portion is Bamidbar or Numbers. But before we get started, let's do the Torah blessing. Baruch Adonai Haorah, Baruch Adonai Haorah, Leolam Ba'ed, Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher b'harmanu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Adonai noten ha-Torah. Bless Adonai who is blessed. Bless Adonai who is blessed now and forever. Blessed are you, Adonai, sovereign of the universe, who has chosen us from among the nations and has given us the Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, giver of the Torah. Amen. Like I said, this week's Torah portion is Bamidbar or Numbers. So we ended the book of Leviticus last week, and so we understood from the book of Leviticus, from what we talked about, from what we studied, God's sacred space, how to approach God, what is clean, what is unclean, what is pure, what is impure, what is, in a sense, moral purity and ritual purity, and how does God want us to present us to Him, and how He wants us to draw near to Him. He also told us how His leaders were to represent us, how they were to keep themselves pure and clean, to represent us, to be an example, to teach us, right? The Levitical priesthood. And so we understood about the sacred times, the appointed times that God chose, that God established for us to obey for generations and generations to come. And so after He gives Israel these commands, and after He structures Israel spiritually, morally, ritually, now we are in the book of Bamidbar, in the wilderness, or the book of Numbers, based on how we start off this Torah portion with a census of the younger males of 20 years and older that are ready for war to represent Israel as they walk right towards the promised land. And so why is there a census? Why are we counting men 20 years or older, right? Why are these things happening? Well, understand that Elohim is trying to establish Israel as a nation, and now that they have a cultic ritual, a temple, a place to worship God, mobile, right, the tabernacle, and a way of ritually approaching Him, they are in a way like nations around them. The difference is that their God is real, that their God is just, and that their God is righteous. And so Elohim, as they will start marching, He wants them to be spiritually, morally, ritually, and now military, organized, and ready to transport God's tabernacle and transport God's throne. God's throne is the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, so now Israel and the Levitical priesthood are commanded how they will walk towards the promised land in the wilderness. Okay, now is when they start walking. Now is when they start walking into the wilderness, living in the wilderness. We are located right now from chapter 1 through 4 in Mount Sinai still. God is preparing, organizing the troops so that when they start walking, they look organized and ready to go. So let's get started with this week's reading, which is Numbers 1 through 4, verse 20. And the Haftarah portion, or the prophets, is Hosea chapter 2, verse 1 to 23. And the New Testament portions are Romans 9, verse 22 to 33. So Numbers 1 starts off like this. וידבר אדוני אל משה במדבר סיני באוהל מועד באחד לחודש השני בשנה השני לצאתה מארץ מצרים לאמור. English, it says the following. The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first of the month, or the second month, in the second year, very specific, after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, take a census of all the congregation of the sons of Israel, by their families and by their father's household, according to the number named, every male head from the 20 years old upward, whoever is able to go out to war in Israel. You and Aaron shall number them by their armies. With you, moreover, there shall be a man of each tribe, each one head of his father's house. These then are the names of the men who shall stand with you. So now comes the account of the men, right? And it's going to go into a numbers, right? Many numbers, establishing how many from each tribe were counted. This is why the name gets the name, the book of Numbers, because there's a census in this Torah portion that starts with the leaders of the tribes, young, 20 years older, that can represent Israel in war. And there's numbers in this chapter. Also, Bamidbar, which is in the wilderness, because that's where they are going to head out to be. So that's why there is Bamidbar in the wilderness, numbers based on the number of the census that is taken in this Torah portion. Also, we're going to use this resource. I'm going to use this resource right here. I'm going to use this resource. It's under Van. And it says here, the title Numbers derives from the Septuagint name Arit Moi, based especially on the census materials in chapters 1 through 4 and chapter 26. The Hebrew title Bamidbar in the wilderness describes the geographical setting of much of the book, from the wilderness of Sinai to arid plains of Moab across the Jordan River from Jericho. Right? So it's establishing where they are geographically, and also the context of the first portion, which is the census. Here it establishes that they go out on the first day of the second month of the second year. Okay, it says here the chronological statement places the military construction census on a new moon festival. Okay, a year in 2 weeks after this Exodus, which it took place on the 14th of Abihu, which equals Nisan, the first month. This notion also occurs after the events described in chapter 7, verse 9, which is the presentation of gifts by the 12 tribes for the service of the tabernacle. Okay, now it also talks about the census. It says that the census for military conscription purpose was common in the Bible and in texts of ancient Near East. In numerous other cases, a sample total of military conscripted for battle is given. The census involved head count. It was an idiomatic Hebrew terminology that reads literally to lift up the head or every male by their skull, capable of military men aged 20 years up. A troop census before going to battle was common in the warfare plans of ancient Sumer, Akkad, and Assyria. Also, at the 20 years older age was accepted of a full maturity in the Bible and the military conscription. The Levitical clan also is eliminated from this battle. They were all to represent Elohim and service the tent, and the Levites were chosen to protect the tabernacle and make sure that nobody approached the tabernacle that was not prescribed to do so. So Elohim is starting to establish the logistics, and so the organization and how they're going to move as a nation, as a tribe. And so Elohim wanted them to be organized because there was nations like Egypt that had similar approaches of how to travel when they were at war or when they were traveling to a certain destination. Pharaoh had a tent. Pharaoh had an army that would go before him. And so Elohim wanted to make sure that when the nation saw Israel, after they had defeated, remember, they defeated Egypt. They've been in the wilderness. This event everybody knew about because Egypt was destroyed. Egypt was defeated. And so Israel is now moving down the wilderness towards the promised land with a military. And so Elohim wants them to be organized and to be a unit. And so in this governmental establishment that Elohim is trying to establish for Israel, there's a couple names or a couple terms that he presents. Number 1, Edah. Number 2, Nasi. Number 3, Mate. And number 4, Aleph. The term Edah represents either all the Israelites or the adult males or the leaders, the chieftains, right? The males that represented, right? The leaders that represented the people. It constitutes a national political body vested in legislative and judicial powers. Right, the Edah brings trials and punishment for violators and covenant, but the individuals, cities, and tribes. It also crowns kings. So the structure that Elohim is trying to establish in the first portion is what is going to be governing the structure of law that is going to represent Israel on their way to the land and in the land. So the structure that we see in the beginning of this Torah portion is what Elohim wanted his people to establish as a ongoing thing, in where they were being guided by the king, who it was him. And so these leaders were chosen to direct and take the people to the promised land on behalf of Elohim, to protect them. And they had a role. It also establishes that each tribe had a banner, like a flag, and it would represent each tribe. And they were organized perfectly around a camp. And so this Torah portion brings us a very important point about how everybody had a function. Remember, each leader will protect a side of the camp. They were not worried about who had the best part of the camp, who had the best position. Each of them fulfilled their duty. The Levites had a responsibility, just like those that protected the camp. The Levites were supposed to protect the tabernacle and their furnishings and the holiness of the tabernacle. Elohim put himself the responsibility of protecting the people. They protected his honor and they represent him correctly. So in this Torah portion, here is the beginning of the structure in the wilderness. Elohim took Israel to the wilderness to teach them how he wanted them to be, to teach them and demonstrate to them who they were and what their purpose was. There's a term that says that sometimes Elohim takes you to the wilderness to help you understand sometimes the purpose, because when you are in the midst of the world, or in the midst of certain things that are going on in the land, right, they will have to walk in this structure, because that image that they portrayed as they march in a unit represented him, right? Bamidbar is the beginning of the wilderness walk. Bamidbar is where the people will be tested. They have been given the instructions. They have been given the blueprint. Now they have to start executing the word of Elohim as they walk in their life to the promised land. And we will learn a lot from these Torah portions. We will learn morally what Israel went through, what Israel's tendencies were emotionally, spiritually, as they walked in the desert. And we will learn that walking in the desert, it was tough for the people. We might find ourselves maybe judging their decisions and their actions, but we also have to reflect that sometimes it's not easy to follow Elohim. Sometimes it's not easy to represent him. As we speak today, there's a lot of things going on in the world, especially in the land. Like I told you last couple weeks, never turn your back against the land. On our way to Shavuot, understand that we are always ascending to holiness. We are always ascending to honor him and honor his name. Israel is going to start ascending to the land, and they will be tested and they will be tried. The leaders, everybody, the Levites, and we will learn what they did and they did right and what they did wrong. And our responsibility is not to say that this is how it was supposed to happen. Our responsibility is to learn from our ancestors and do our best to not make the same decisions, so that we can represent Elohim correctly. So as we elevate ourselves, as we draw near to Elohim, and we learn how to defend him, how to honor him, I ask you to take your time to get to know his heart, get to know his word. I hope that this small introduction, like I said, I would love to get into more information. Time doesn't give me. Please read 4 chapters, Bamidbar, in the desert, in the wilderness, Numbers, the census. We are being counted into the land. Are we being counted? Are you being counted? Are you being obedient? Are you going to be picked? Are you one of those that is reserving and preserving himself to defend Elohim's honor? That's a big question that we have to ask. Hope you guys have a great week. I hope you guys have a great Shavuot, the giving of the Torah, the giving of the Holy Spirit. Exciting. And I hope you guys have a great Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.